Welcome to the future. Technologies and innovations that sculpt our industry.
This episode brought to you by N.O.R.A, advancing a zero-carbon home heating future. Learn more at NORAweb.org.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're hanging out again at the National HVAC Education Conference. This time, I'm sitting down with my friend Bob O'Brien, Director of Education for N.O.R.A, and also very involved in OESP, a variety of different aspects of the energy side of our industry.
Yes.
So, how are things going?
Very good. Very busy.
Yeah, I bet.
A lot. It's a transitional time in the industry.
Oh, my goodness.
So N.O.R.A is the National Oil Heat Research Alliance, which is kind of a misnomer because most of what we do is working on transitioning the industry to renewable fuels.
Yeah.
You know, the future is low carbon.
It really is. You know, when I came out to the Eastern Energy Expo that you invited me to, it was an amazing opportunity to learn about alternative fuels that I really didn't know enough about. And a lot of people aren't aware of all of the science and all the engineering that goes into developing some of these alternative fuels that are replacements for things that we consider like fuel oils and diesels. So tell me a little bit about that entire research and where the industry has moved in these alternative fuel oil projects.
Sure. Biodiesel is the longest running.
Yes.
The focus has been on that. Lately, it shifted a little bit to renewable diesel.
Okay.
A very similar fuel, but biodiesel can replace diesel and heating oil, like for like. It's
really? Yeah.
very, very similar, not exactly the same. There's some slight difference. So a lot of the research we do is focused on quantifying those differences and overcoming those technical barriers. Or is it going to operate differently? How does it operate in the cold? A myriad of different things.
Heck yeah, I can only imagine. Does it gel up? Does it need different orifices? Does it run at a different burner temperature, ignition temperatures? Does it need a different, fuel oxygen ratio? Sure, there's a lot that goes into the development of that. There are a lot of people in the industry that think of fuel oil as being a fuel source that's no longer used, but that's really not true. There's still a lot of fuel oil systems in service.
Around 5 million.
Is it really?
Yeah, just under 5 million.
Wow.
So it's a pretty big number.
Yeah.
Not in the scheme of the whole country, but 5 million of anything's a lot.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And so I'm sure it's still probably pretty regional in areas where the supply and availability of fuel oil is still quite, significant.
It's focused in the Northeast, basically Maryland to Maine, the bulk of it. But there's 21 states that participate in N.O.R.A. N.O.R.A is a checkoff program.
Oh, yeah.
So states can opt in or out. There's 21 that participate. So Indiana is one.
Yeah.
Michigan, there's quite a few that you wouldn't really think of as oil heat states. North Carolina, South Carolina.
Oh, I really wouldn't. But I imagine in some of those areas, the availability of natural gases may not be in all of their markets. Yeah, so the fuel oil is a very significant alternative supply.
Those areas, it's in the more rural areas.
Exactly.
Western North Carolina, the mountainous regions. But West North Carolina is a pretty big, still heating oil market.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at like alternative fuels, are there a variety of different applications?
The idea is to get these alternative fuels to fit into the existing appliances. In other words, you don't want to change the equipment base, 5 million units. That's not really a practical solution.
Right.
So to getting to close as a drop-in fuel as you can get is the goal.
Yes.
And if there's any minor changes made that the research brings out, then we can, suggest that, and manufacturers can either pursue or not if they feel there's a market for it.
Sure.
A lot already have.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I know very similar to like the refrigerant industry, there's never really like a one size fits all.
Different parts of the country, different solutions.
Exactly. So when we're looking at those different fuels, what is the differences between them?
Biodiesel is from a chemical process.
Okay.
It's biodiesel from a living product.
Right.
Primarily soybean oil.
Okay.
Canola oil, used cooking oil, and there's some animal fats and they're put through a chemical process called transesterification, and that forms biodiesel. So it's basically a room temperature, atmospheric pressure procedure.
Okay.
It's not like a oil refinery, high temperature, high pressure, heavy industry.
Yeah.
You could do it in this room if you wanted to.
So it's a natural reaction.
Yeah, it's a chemical reaction.
Well, how about that? So as a chemical reaction then, so we're not talking about like a crude refinery for oils. We're talking about using a atmospheric condition to be able to, what does that process look like? I mean, what are we actually doing?
They put in a catalyst.
Okay.
And that initiates the reaction. So
Okay.
it's basically methanol and lye
Okay.
are the two ingredients they add to the soybean oil, used
Yeah.
cooking oil, whatever it may be.
Okay.
And then the transesterification process happens, and it yields biodiesel and a byproduct of glycerin, which is used in soap making and other.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there is still some separation in that process.
Yes.
Okay. I guess I hadn't really thought about
There's
that.
an ASTM standard for it.
Uh-huh.
So it's not like the industry first started, it was kind of like the home brew.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was widening quality, but there's very high quality standards in an ASTM spec
Yeah, I
that
gotcha.
all fuel has to meet. So it's consistent across the board.
Okay. Oh, yeah, definitely. And so I noticed when we were at the Eastern Energy Expo, there were a variety of different levels of fuel. What do we see being the primary replacement in our residential and like commercial fuel oil systems?
Well, the goal is to get that 100% renewable.
100.
Obviously,
Yeah.
the goal right now, the heating oil ASTM spec allows up to 5% biodiesel
Okay.
without informing anybody.
Okay. Yeah.
That's can be included.
It's acceptable to have up to this amount.
2%
Yeah.
in the spec,
Sure.
and the vast majority of it does.
Okay. All right.
So everybody who thinks they're not using biofuel is, in fact, using
You're
about
actually
5%,
using
whether you
biofuel.
know it or not. New York State has a mandate for B10 next July.
Okay.
Rhode Island's already at B10, and Connecticut also has a B10 mandate for next July.
Okay. So,
Five.
so when we see that B10, and what is that representing?
The
for
B
us?
is the bio segment. So B10 would be 10% biodiesel, 90% petroleum.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. And so when we're looking, I imagine that because we're using a longer period of process to develop the 100% biofuel, it's probably more expensive right now than the lesser blends.
It basically trades in parity. So
Oh.
it's a replacement for diesel fuel
Yeah. Yeah.
in the transportation industry.
Oh, okay.
So there's demand for that from the heavy demand from the transportation industry. So if the price of petroleum diesel were to rise, people are going to shift over and start buying more biodiesel,
Absolutely.
driving that price up. And then, so it trades basically in parity,
Okay.
a few cents in either direction.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes one will be cheaper than the other or vice versa. So it's just,
It's
about
very comparable then.
Yeah.
All right. So we have an alternative though.
yes.
And that's one of the things that we struggle with when we look at some of our other replacement fuels. Like if we look at natural gas and LP, we really don't have those kind of options.
They're under development, but not available at the moment, or at the scale. Biodiesel's already at a large scale. It had a head start,
Exactly.
for the transportation industry. It's obviously the agricultural industry is heavily involved in
I can only imagine.
developing and promoting it as well.
Yeah, take a lot of raw material to be able to produce
A lot of
some
soybeans.
needs. Yeah, absolutely. So, you brought up an interesting point. So, do we then have the potential for having replacements for natural gas and for LP applications going forward?
There are obviously, I work for the liquid fuels industry, so I don't say as on top of them, but obviously there's
Yeah.
a huge amount of hydrogen research going on.
Yeah, that's one I've wondered about the most.
Yeah, renewable natural gas, renewable propane.
Yeah.
Renewable diesel is another renewable liquid fuel that's hit the market lately in New York and coming into Boston.
Renewable diesel fuel.
Slightly different than biodiesel.
Okay.
It's processed in a repurposed oil refinery.
Oh.
High pressure, high temperature. That's where sustainable aviation fuel comes from.
No kidding.
It's
Okay.
A byproduct,
Byproduct of
that. Yeah,
Okay.
which is a real big thing at the moment. SAF, sustainable aviation fuel.
Yeah.
It also yields renewable propane and other gases
Okay.
that are all renewable.
It brings up another point. I hadn't even really thought about that. I'd like to talk about how our industry is not the only one being impacted by our reduction of our carbon footprint, by whatever you want to call it. But typically, we would look at it as a like a degasification or the decarbonization. There's so many different terms. It really comes down to we're doing our due diligence to be responsible for our environment, reducing our global impact. And so many times when we're talking about HVAC and refrigeration, we talk about how it's impacting our industry. I always like to make sure we're aware that it's not the only industry that's being impacted. And I hadn't thought about the whole aviation fuel as well. Are they looking very much into the renewable fuels at the same time that we're looking
Sure.
at these other
Rail,
areas?
it's marine.
Yeah.
Marine's another huge. You're not going to electrify planes or boats.
Yeah, no kidding.
Ships.
And I couldn't imagine the electrical consumption we'd need to do, electric train transport that was hauling product.
Yeah, it's not practical.
No, maybe people,
Yeah.
but products, we're talking hundreds of thousands of tons, that just not something we can do very easily. So we're looking at those optional fuels and alternative fuels.
Industrial processes, it's huge there too.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And so it gives us the opportunity to step back and think about our impact into this transition. I call it the transition because all of these efforts really come down to that whole, reducing our carbon footprint. And going forward, we're going to see a lot of alternative refrigerants, a lot of alternative fuels. So our industry is constantly evolving. Now, if I'm an educator and I'm currently teaching on fuel oil systems, because I've actually talked to some of our educators here that have,
So have I.
have fuel oil training programs. So how can an educator that's trying to be prepared for the future, where do they go to be able to learn about what's happening in this transition?
That's N.O.R.A's job.
Okay.
So we do a lot of a huge amount of training.
Right.
A train the trainer type thing, as well as getting out to technicians directly ourselves
Okay.
and explaining the difference between some of these fuels: cloud points, pour points, oxygen content. The combustion process is slightly different.
Okay.
So there are some differences,
Some
but
variables.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the manufacturers also do it, the equipment manufacturers.
Okay.
So 2 of the 3, there's only 3 real burner manufacturers in the USA, and 2 of them already have B100 approved burners on the market.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. I know last year we were talking about we had one. Now we got at least a couple of them been certified for it. So if I'm an educator and I'm looking to contact N.O.R.A, what is the best way to get into the loop so I can stay ahead of these transitions?
That's the name of our podcast, In the Loop.
Yeah, look at that.
NORAweb.org.
Yes.
That'll be the best for anybody to get in touch with me if they have any questions.
Okay. And so let's talk about In the Loop. Let's talk about these opportunities to stay educated, because what we're starting to see is more specialized podcast, right? We need to. We'll be able to build our communities and then stay connected, just like we're doing right here. We're talking to educators, we're talking to contractors and technicians and students. And as we start honing in on the training that we need, it's very important to connect with the right sources. So tell me about your podcast, how long we've been running and the topics that we're covering.
N.O.R.A kicked off their podcast last May
Mhm.
at the Eastern Energy Expo.
Right.
Kind of similar event, not as nice a booth as you have, but similar to that. And basically industry leaders, manufacturers, state associations, service managers, wholesalers, the whole gamut, of the industry. But you're right. I think it has to get down to the students and the technicians as well, not just keeping it at a 30,000-foot view. I think
That's
you have to
right.
get down in the trenches.
Yeah.
Where the guys are, and they're the ones who are going to confront and have to solve these problems.
100%, because they're going to be facing these things, and education is going to be so critical. I feel like 2024 is going to be a transitional period for education, because everyone is being impacted by some type of a transition. Things that were consistent and stable for decades are now getting some renovations. And so we all have our own duties and responsibilities to stay prepared for this. So if you're working on fuel oil, you want to learn more about fuel oil, if you want to stay ahead of what's happening in that sector, make sure that you hop on the podcast networks and look for In the Loop and join Bob on some of these conversations.
I'm only in a couple of them.
Oh, yeah. so a variety of different
It's a wide
topics.
net,
Yeah.
wide variety of topics,
Okay.
sustainability and all types of renewable fuels, a lot of topics, manufacturing.
Fantastic. Any other things, news in the industry that we want to address while we're in here today?
N.O.R.A's started a train the trainer initiative.
There we go.
We call it an accredited instructor program.
Ah.
So we've contracted with an educational consultant.
Uh-huh.
Most of the training is part-time,
Right.
at least in the liquid fuels industry.
Okay.
So they're techs that came from the field. Some of them are full-time, but they're generally techs from the field and they got thrown into the classroom.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
generally don't have education degrees or a lot of experience in front of a class, lesson planning, learning objectives, that type of thing. So we've contracted with an education consultant to do a 3-day in-depth in our Plainview facility
Oh, wow.
training, but not on the technical class, totally classroom skills.
On
That's
delivery.
been really well received. Delivery, lesson plans, goals and objectives,
Man.
that type of thing. It's been very well received. I think that's going to make an impact going forward.
I'd like to learn more about that. I'd like to follow up with you, because that's a super important thing to know, that there are programs out there to give you some of those additional their tools. And, just like a tool that we would use in a job when we come into the classroom, there's a lot of new tools that we have to pick up and learn how to use. And that whole construction of a classroom and delivery. Those are not things that we typically learn in the field.
You're really good at fixing furnaces,
Yeah.
but maybe not so good at teaching other people to fix furnaces. And that's the
Exactly.
gap we're trying to fill.
Yeah.
Technically, these guys are great.
Right.
That's why they ended up in the position. Somebody saw something, thought they'd be good at it. They were technically proficient.
Yep.
Classroom skills.
Yeah. That's a nice
Relating to people, especially there's usually an age gap. Most of the instructors are Gen X or Boomer, and we have a Gen Z millennial student body.
Yeah, and sometimes alpha now. I mean, we're heading into alpha. So then we're like, what? I got 2 different generations that actually learn in different ways. And
3 or 4 now.
yeah.
So the goal is to try to bridge that gap, to give them the classroom skills. They haven't had any formal educational training. They've generally come from the field.
And most of us do.
Yep, me too.
Yeah, same right here. Okay. Well, we sure appreciate all the efforts that you're doing in the industry.
Nope, thank you.
I look forward to see, hopefully I get to make it to the Eastern Energy Expo. It's such an amazing conference.
Love to have you.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us here, and I look forward to future conversations.
Yep, thank you for having me.